The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was formed by the unifications of the Kingdom of Hejaz and Nejd in 1932. The flag of Saudi Arabia has an Arabic inscription and a sword. The inscription is the Shahada, which is the Islamic creed. It reads, "There's no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of God." The green of the flag represents Islam, and the sword stands for the strictness in applying justice. The flag is manufactured with identical sides to ensure the Shahada reads correctly from right to left from either side. The flag is not worn on clothing and is never flown at half-staff. Saudi Arabia takes up most of the Arabian Peninsula. It is bordered by the Red Sea to the west and the Persian Gulf to the east. It shares borders with Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. Islam emerged from modern-day Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is home to two of the most important cities in Islam, Medina and Mecca. Since finding petroleum in the 1930s, Saudi Arabia has become the largest oil exporter in the world. Due to the harsh climate of most of the peninsula, only 1% of land in Saudi Arabia is arable. This forced the country to restructure their agriculture in order to support their population. Contributing to this is the fact that Saudi Arabia has no rivers or lakes, also making it difficult to travel through the country. Saudi Arabia's location and relevance to waterways has influenced many treaties and adjustments to their border in order to ensure that Saudi Arabia and its neighbors have water access. This is a very brief history of some important events in Saudi Arabia's history. In 1938, oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia, and the American-controlled Aramco, or the Arabian American Oil Company, began producing oil. This would eventually help Saudi Arabia become the largest petroleum exporter in the world. In 1979, Islamic extremists seized the Grand Mosque in Mecca, partially in protest of what was seen as the government's corrupt and un-Islamic nature. While control of the mosque was retained, the event emphasized the importance of Islam in Saudi Arabia, and the royal family became stricter on religious observances and following Sharia law. Their political Islam did not solve the unrest, as some groups within Saudi Arabia became increasingly extremist. In 1980, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia gained full control of Aramco, giving it a greater economic opportunity. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Saudi Arabia condemned Iraq for this act and allowed Kuwait government officials, citizens, and troops to stay in the country. This began the Persian Gulf War. Saudi Arabia's involvement in the war was a great cost to the country. It also drew criticism within Saudi Arabia as people questioned the wisdom of the royal family, the economic setback, and their relationship with the United States. In response, in 1992, King Fahd announced the Basic Law of Saudi Arabia, which is much like a constitution in other countries. It reinforced Islamic law in Saudi Arabia and defined the role of the king. The 9/11 attacks in 2001 created tension between Saudi Arabia and the United States. 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals. The U.S. began pressuring Saudi Arabia to make sure there was no money funneling to al-Qaeda. Americans became increasingly skeptical of Saudi Arabia and of Islam in general. While the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia has been recovered, tensions still persist. In 2001, Saudi Arabia and Qatar finally resolved territorial disputes. In 2017, women in Saudi Arabia were legally allowed to drive after decades of protest. The order was not to be implemented until 2018. In 1990, dozens of women in Riyadh protested the ban on women driving by simply driving. In result, they were imprisoned for a day and had their passports confiscated. In 2007, the Association for the Protection and Defense of Women's Rights in Saudi Arabia submitted a petition to King Abdullah to legalize women driving. The co-founder of the organization posted a YouTube video of herself driving, which drew global attention. Inspired by the Arab Spring, Women to Drive was created in 2011. One of the founders, Al Sharif, posted a video of herself driving and was arrested. Upon release on bail, she could not drive or speak to the media, or she would have to return to police custody. Protests for and against Women to Drive proceeded for years to come. In September of 2017, King Salman recognized the right of women to drive. Many of the Women to Drive activists remain in custody and have suffered abuses by the police. Al Sharif, the founder of Women to Drive, has lived in Australia since 2017. In fear of being arrested, she has chosen not to return to Saudi Arabia, but to drive from Washington, D.C. to Birmingham, Alabama, in order to protest the continuous human rights abuses persisting in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's government is a totalitarian, absolute monarchy. The Quran is considered the constitution, and the country is governed under Islamic law. The king is both the head of state and the head of government, and functions as the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government. He is also the prime minister, which is the head of the council of ministers, responsible for executive and administrative issues. There is the consultative assembly, which solely proposes legislation to the king. Royal succession and laws must be approved by the ulama. Under basic law, the king must be chosen from male descendants of the first king, Abdul Aziz al-Saud, and must be approved by the ulama. The ulama is the body of Islamic leaders that is historically controlled by the al-Shaikh family, descendants of the founder of Sunni Islam. With their moral authority, and the al-Shaikh have the role of legitimizing the royal family's rule. The Council of Ministers is comprised of the first and second deputy prime ministers, traditionally the first and second in line for the throne, and 30 other ministers. All are appointed by the king. The Consultative Assembly is also appointed by the king, and most important posts in the government are held by members of the royal family. Here are a few of the important and current political actors in Saudi Arabia. King Salman, as I previously mentioned, is also the head of state and the head of government. The Crown Prince Mohammed is also the next in line for the throne and the Minister of Defense. Princess Rima bint Bandar Al Saud is the Saudi Arabian ambassador to the United States. Adel Al Jubeir is the former Saudi Minister of Foreign Affairs and the current Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. Abdul Aziz Ibn Abdullah Al Shaikh is the Grand Mufti, which is a part of the ulama and the most influential religious figure within Saudi Arabia. Lastly is Khalid Al Fali, who is the Minister of Energy, Industry, and Mineral Resources of Saudi Arabia and the chairman of Saudi Aramco, which again is the Arabian American oil company. One thing to remember when it comes to Saudi Arabia is that the Al Saud family historically has the role of king and controls the government, while the Al Shaikh family legitimizes the royal family, make up the ulama, and have a moral authority, and both families are held in equal respect among the people of Saudi Arabia. Basically, Saudi Arabia is controlled by the Al Saud family and the Al Shaikh family. Lastly, I would compare Saudi Arabia to Russia out of the three countries that we've looked at so far, mostly because Russia does have elements of an authoritarian government, while Saudi Arabia is a little bit further along on the spectrum in a totalitarian absolute monarchy.